This just into CNN. Twitter has now restricted the Twitter account of Donald Trump Jr., the president's son, after he shared video of medical doctors spreading misinformation about the coronavirus. We should note that the president himself RT'd, shared many of the same videos.
With us now, CNN chief political correspondent Dana Bash and Dr. Carlos Del Rio, Executive Associate Dean of Emory University School of Medicine at Grady Health System in Atlanta. Good morning to you guys. Dana, from my understanding, in terms of this Twitter restriction of tweeting for Don Jr., it's like 12 hours. And the question is, how many people saw this and believed this before action was taken? Talk about, if you understand, the politics behind the president's son tweeting falsehoods and then the president retweeting it, and the why when the science is just so clear.
We could probably talk about this for your 2 hours and then some, and maybe this psychiatry or the psychology beyond it, that's beyond all of us. But just from my perspective on the raw politics, which is, really what matters here, this is a president who started out as a candidate who did well stoking culture wars. And this is another version of a culture war in President Trump's mind. Despite what he said last week, despite what was very carefully scripted for him, despite the fact that he was given data point after data point on his own polling about how bad he is doing and how poorly he is seen in the eyes of so many voters. He needs to be reelected because of tweets like this, because of his gut instinct, which is not to follow science, but to try to convince people otherwise. He continues to do that. And it's not just him, it is obviously his son. And, you're right, despite Twitter suspending his account and restricting his account, the cat's out of the bag. You can't change it.
Yeah.
Listen, it's disturbing. It makes a difference. You can argue it costs lives. Dr. Del Rio, you're a public health expert. Explain the impact of the sitting president of the United States repeatedly sharing disinformation that impacts people's health. What is the impact to people at home, but also on the population? Because you need to get an outbreak under control across the population to protect individuals.
Jim, I think it's very sad. It also makes me very mad because the reality is the United States has some of the best scientists in the world, and the fact that science is not being respected is exactly the reason why we're not responding well to this epidemic. The response to an epidemic, the U.S. wrote the book on how to respond to pandemics and how to respond to epidemics. We know how to do this. The reality is we have not implemented what's necessary, and because we haven't done so, we are in the mess we are in right now. So follow the science. We need to do what science tells us to do. And the reality is until we do that, we're going to be in a mess for as long as we want to.
Dr. Del Rio, to that point, you're part of the team, one of the investigators on the team in this Moderna phase 3 trial. And this is looking, even Dr. Fauci said he was optimistic about it yesterday. It's looking promising. You've got 30,000 humans volunteering to be a part of it right now. My question is about when disinformation is spread by the president and the president's son, how do people know to believe the real information when it's spread, once it's proven out if this vaccine proves to be effective?
Well, you're absolutely right. That is the challenge, right? Distinguishing what's true and what's false. And unfortunately, the president has a bully pulpit that is very important. You got to remember that when the results of the remdesivir study were first released, they were released at the Oval Office in the White House because it was such an important finding. So I think, trust in science needs to be restored. And if we're going to get out of this mess, we need science to be driving and the front, driving the response.
Dana, is it perhaps time, and not time really, beyond time, because this is not new, to acknowledge that this is a feature, not a bug, of the president's approach to government, but also to this election, right? That denial of the virus, attacking the science behind shutdowns or mask wearing or other restrictions is a deliberate strategy rather than a mistake or him going off the path here and there, right? Is that where the evidence points?
Yeah, I mean, there's a deliberate strategy by him, the person, the candidate, the president, which should and does matter most. And then there is the attempted strategy at those around him who have a broader and maybe more reasonable approach and understanding to how to get reelected and to how to treat these matters as just a basic show of leadership, never mind an assault on science. And so you have those two things which are constantly at odds. I'm not saying that there aren't people around the president who don't agree with him. There are. But it is the issue that people who have been hired by him and fired by him in this sort of, movement that we've seen the president's staff for his entire, never mind his first campaign, but his entire first term. And that is largely because there are people who tried to put him on the right path, and his instinct. I just was talking before coming on with you, Jim, to somebody who's very familiar with the president's thinking. The answer was, this is just who he is. He can't help himself. So combine that with the fact that he still goes back to 2016 and believing that this is how he can win. That's how you get to the tweets overnight.